So we see that there is an incredible foundation that is of a scientific nature. This has nothing to do with the fact of our faith that we believe it, but scientific evidence for the reliability of the Scriptures.
Glorifying God, proclaiming truth, and reclaiming America for Christ. This is Truths That Transform. Your host is Dr. D. James Kennedy, pastor of the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church and president of Coral Ridge Ministries. Discover how to apply biblical principles and transform your world through Jesus Christ. It seems like every time you turn on the TV, someone is bashing the Christian faith. Just a few years ago, a major TV network produced a documentary leaving viewers thinking that the Jesus of the Bible is a myth. And only a month ago, that same network aired another show promoting the outrageous claim that Christ was married to Mary Magdalene. Is it any wonder that more Christians are turning off their TVs? So for the next 2 days, our host will be countering the tall tales from unbelievers and giving you the ammunition you need to defend the biblical, historical Jesus Christ. Later on, I'll let you know how you can obtain an audio cassette of the entire message to share with your unbelieving friends and family members. But first, here is Dr. Kennedy.
Some years ago, I preached a sermon about Jesus Christ entitled, Liar, Lunatic, or Lord, attempting to answer the question who he was. A madman, one who was deceived, like those who imagine themselves to be Napoleon or a fried egg? Or was he indeed the very Lord of glory? I don't think I need tell you how I came down on that particular message. Today, I'd like to preach on a somewhat different theme. Jesus Christ, myth or Messiah? The question now is not who was he, but rather, was he at all? Did he ever actually live, or is he simply a cunningly devised myth, a fable, a fairy tale, as occasionally some of the less learned skeptics and atheists are still wont to say? And I'm afraid that even some church members find that occasionally Satan may attack them with that question. So, look with me today at the question, did Jesus Christ ever really live? Or is this all some sort of moonshine, cleverly concocted by who knows whom? Well, first of all, let's consider the Scriptures themselves. They are the principal testimony that we have about Jesus Christ. Now, many people haven't the faintest idea how historically reliable the Scriptures are. And most people would be quite amazed to discover that the Scriptures are more reliable than any other historical book which has come down to us from antiquity. That they rest upon a scientific foundation, the like of which exists under no other ancient writing, secular or religious. There are three ingredients that go into examining an ancient writing. The first one is the distance that lies between the writer himself and the earliest extant copy, because many people do not know that there are no extant copies of any ancient writings. There are none of them in existence. What we have is copies of copies of copies of copies. The question is, how close to the original source do the manuscripts actually go? Well, let's take a look at a few ancient writings and compare them with the Scripture. For example, in the case of Virgil, there is 300 years between the time that he lived and the earliest extant manuscript of his writing, 350 years. The case of Livy, 500 years. Of Horace, 900. Of Demosthenes, the most famous orator of all time, 1,200 years separates the time of his life from the earliest extant manuscript. Or Plato, perhaps the greatest of the Greek philosophers, whose writings are accepted virtually without question, and yet 1,300 years separate the time that Plato lived from the time of his earliest extant writings. The great Greek dramatists have 1,400 or more years separating them from their source. Well, how about the Scripture? Here we find a very different situation. The earliest extant fragment of Scripture is known as the Rylands fragment of a portion of the Gospel of John, and that goes back to within 30 years of the time that it was actually written, actually about 29 years. We have other portions of Scripture that go back to 100 years, and full manuscripts going back to 200 years after the time of the conclusion of the writing of the New Testament. A second factor which is important is the number of manuscripts which exist. Obviously, if you have two manuscripts purporting to be copies of an original, and one of them says he went out of the house and the other one says he went into the house, how do you know which is correct? Obviously, there's no way to tell except maybe flip a coin and take your pick. If you have 10 copies, it becomes easier. If you have 50 or 100, it becomes vastly easier. Well, how does the New Testament compare with other ancient writings? We have seen that, for example, the Greek anthology has only one extant copy remaining to our time. In the case of Aeschylus, there are 50 manuscripts of any date at all. In the case of the New Testament, however, it is far different. We have over 5,000 manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts in Greek, and over 10,000 manuscripts in other early translations, for a total of 15,000 manuscripts. There is nothing in all of ancient literature, secular or religious, that even comes remotely close to that. A third factor is how carefully these various manuscripts have been collated and examined. In the case of the Scripture, there is nothing that has ever been done in all of literature, in any language, any place in the world, that is similar to what has happened to the Scripture. Every single sentence, every text, every word, every letter, every accent in every one of these thousands and thousands of manuscripts have all been collated and examined and compared. Nothing like this has ever been done for any other religion in the world. Furthermore, the Scriptures have been attacked by the most vicious critics imaginable down through the centuries. They have done everything in their power to destroy and demolish their authority. But as one writer said, never has an elephant labored so long to produce a mouse. The result has been that the Scriptures now stand more firmly planted upon a solid foundation than they did before the critics started. So we see that there is an incredible foundation that is of a scientific nature. This has nothing to do with the fact of our faith that we believe it, but scientific evidence for the reliability of the Scriptures. Well, there are those that might say, well, yes, that's true, but you see, this is a gradually developed myth. Maybe there was a Jesus that lived, but he was just a human being, and over the years, you see, they gradually attributed miracles to him until he now is conceived to be the Son of God.